All right, this is episode 6 of Evidence-Based Esports. And in this episode, we're going to be going over a pretty unique article that hasn't yet been published, but will be in the International Journal of Exercise Science. And this is a article that Jake Middleton, our exercise physiologist, reviewed. And it goes over the heart rate response during the esport Fortnite, which is so awesome because I play a lot of Fortnite myself. So I'm really interested to dive into this topic. So Jake, why don't you tell us what the main objective or purpose of this study was?
Yes. So the main purpose of this study was to understand the heart rate responses of individuals playing esports. So specifically Fortnite in this case. So we wanted to determine the heart rate response during a 3-hour seated session because that's how most scrim blocks are set up. So that's kind of and what was realistic for the study. So that's what they aimed to find out. For the study design, they basically took 24 healthy participants who met at the Ole Miss Exercise Science Lab. They completed a health, exercise, and esports training questionnaire. They did a total of 2 15-minute seated heart rates where they collected it using a Polar H10 heart rate monitor and then the Polar Beat mobile app on 2 separate days. For all the heart rate measures, participants sat for 5 minutes before recording of a heart rate was initiated. They wore the heart rate monitor during their regular 3-hour Fortnite session that day while recording their stats in each solo match. They were instructed to remain seated throughout the duration of the 3-hour session. This was done at home too. So after completion of the 3-hour session at their home, the participants returned to the lab to return the heart rate monitor, and then they did their second 15-minute seated heart rate measurement to complete the study. And so the peak and the mean heart rates were identified using the polar flow account.
That's awesome. I just have some questions though. Do you know, so it was only solo mode, correct?
Correct, only solo mode.
Gotcha. And then do you know if it was solo arena, which is the competitive playlist for Fortnite, or was it just the standard solo?
I believe it was just the standard solo because I think at the time, I don't think they had the arena at that time.
Gotcha. Okay, and then
did they identify whether these the participants in the study were people who'd been playing Fortnite for a long time, were just kind of casually messing around with friends, were trying to be competitive, were trying to just have fun?
Right. So one of the premises of the study is that participants had to play at least 6 hours of esports a week, and that was the only data point that they took from that. They didn't take how many esports games do you play, how long have you been playing Fortnite and stuff like that. It was just do you play
more hours total.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Interesting. What else was on the questionnaire that they had for exercise, esports training? Just curious.
So I actually didn't see the questionnaire. The researcher, he's the professor of exercise science at Ole Miss, Tom Andre. He and then the lead author, the student Damon Cox, they basically put that together. But I think it was kind of your standard health and exercise history. And then in terms of the esports training history was basically finding out if they played at least 6 hours of esports a week. And then I think a few other questions, I'm not exactly sure.
Interesting. I'm just curious if they played actual scrims or if they're involved in any discords that are relevant to the competitive esports for Fortnite as an inclusion criteria. But it seems like it was just the 6 hours, right?
Correct. Yep. With that, I'm not sure. I know Ole Miss esports has their own Discord server, but in terms of the competitive servers, I'm not sure about that.
Gotcha. So you said they had to at least play for 6 hours a week, and that was the inclusion criteria. How were they recruited?
So they were recruited. Basically, I think they put up flyers around the University of Mississippi, and then they did kind of word of mouth. But mostly, I'm assuming at least all the participants mostly came from the Ole Miss Esports Club.
Gotcha. And do you feel that it's pretty representative of the overall Fortnite population, or maybe just the general gaming population?
I would say it is, because the average age of the participants was around 20, 21 years old. they played on average around 12 hours a week. So that might be a little low compared to other populations. Some were actually college players that competed with the college, but none that you would consider, professional players playing at that level.
I am wondering if for Fortnite specifically, I know a lot of our esports that we work with, the demographics use kind of upper end of teenage years, early 20s, and even upwards towards now late 20s. That the industry has been around for such a long period of time, with apologies to outliers like Red Eye and Nahaz, who are not in their early 20s anymore. But the Fortnite scene definitely seems to skew younger in terms of an age population. So I'm wondering to what extent this is going to be generalizable to all of Fortnite versus to kind of a more specific subset of age ranges. So I know that we've got, players in the World Cup who are, in 13 to 15 age range.
That's right.
And doing quite well at it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It might not be representative of those populations yet, because youth heart rates compared to teenager, in your 20s, definitely some developmental differences there. So I think in terms of just college players, I think it could be representative of that population, but in terms of the much larger, it's hard to say.
So it looks like there wasn't any control group. Were there any other steps that you know of that they took to limit bias, or any other important things within the methodology that you wanted or you were able to identify?
There wasn't too much that I knew that they did, but I know that they had each of the researchers basically review the data that came in from the heart rate monitors, and then I think one of them followed up either through, email with a lot of the participants, because they did go to their home to take the heart rate measurements, and then they would come back, so they had to set up the meetings and everything for that. That's all I really know, and that's all they actually put into the study in terms of the manuscript and the poster. So I'm not sure any other stuff that they might have put in there.
Gotcha. And how many patients or study participants dropped out, and what was the reason?
There's just one that dropped out. They dropped out because scheduling issues, most likely just with classes and stuff like that.
Gotcha. And what about the statistical method that they actually used to analyze the data?
So for the statistical analysis, they used a paired samples t-test that was utilized to compare the mean ambient, which ambient is seated, versus mean Fortnite heart rate, and for the peak seated heart rate versus the peak Fortnite heart rate. So basically, when they first tested the heart rate, and then obviously when they were playing the Fortnite as well, and compare those values.
So what were the results?
So the results, basically, there's some interesting results here. During the standard 3-hour training practice session, the mean and the peak heart rates were increased. Given the increase in the heart rate response, it appears in a non-competitive environment, because these were not competitions. Just playing Fortnite has an impact on heart rate. The highest individual heart rate was recorded at 148 beats per minute, and a total of 20 participants had peak heart rates over 100 beats per minute. A total of 9 participants had peak heart rates above 130 beats per minute. And with this, definitely more research needs to be done, different population groups. I'd say a limitation of the study is that it was not in a controlled laboratory setting, whereas it was at home. So the protocol was that they needed to stay seated. But so we don't necessarily know if they stay seated or not, but participants were instructed to report like any deviation from the protocol, and no deviations were reported.
Yeah, this is obviously a really interesting, pilot study into this type of research, right? Because for traditional sports, it can get up to 150 to 185 in terms of peak heart rate. And with the highest individual recording it at 148, when it's a context where it's not competitive, that's really interesting.
That's big, yeah.
Right? That is very interesting, and really a testament to how much stress that individual situations within the game can create, right? Whether it be end game or even early game. And I'm sure even in the future, being able to study early game versus late game heart rate responses can be helpful, maybe for training. But let's just zoom back out. What was the study question that they posed answered, or was the objective met?
I say the objective was met, yes, because they determined the heart rate responses for the players during the 3-hour sessions. But definitely more research is needed in terms of different games. Do we see the same responses in games like Fortnite compared to Dota 2, and then different environments too, non-competitive environments versus competitive environments?
I really want to stress for people listening that one, the heart rates that we were describing are definitely high up there because standard heart rate, resting heart rate should be somewhere between 60 and 100 beats per minute. I think something else I'd really like to have seen in this particular study is, even if not necessarily a control group, having a kind of control measure of these participants. That is 3 hours where they're sitting at a computer doing things that aren't gaming, watching YouTube videos, doing classwork, studying, just so we get a sense of what do their fluctuations in heart rate look like in a non-competitive environment. So we have something more to compare it to than just resting. Because when you're on a computer, you're not just resting, you are also interacting. There's a cognitive component to the fatigue there. I think that would have been a nice piece to see, or a potential follow-up for this study.
Definitely, I like that. And I even, thinking about it now, it would have been nice to get resting heart rates of all the participants too, just to see where that was at.
Right, because...
Oh, I'd assumed they'd gotten those.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think they did. It might have been in the initial questionnaire and testing, but I don't see it anywhere in the manuscript, so I don't think they did.
Gotcha. Yeah, it doesn't look like there was a control group based on what you sent us, so that's definitely a big thing that we need to be able to differentiate, because what if these individuals, when they're just looking at YouTube videos and looking at something that's a little scary, what if it spikes to that as well? And
right, and what if their resting heart rate is something like they've got an abnormal degree of elevated heart rate, where they rest at 70, 80 beats per minute, and that if that's the player that's also jumping up to 148 beats per minute at peak heart rate, that marks an absolute increase that is higher than others, but a relative increase that's not necessarily higher.
Correct, yeah. Knowing their max heart rate would be nice too. If someone's at 110, it might not be comparable to someone else whose heart rate may be higher.
And I know a lot of the studies that are done on other traditional sports like basketball, soccer, football always take a percentage of the max heart rate as a way to, or as a metric to determine the heart rate response. So I think, again, another thing that can be looked at in the future. So I think with all this being said...
While we're talking about things to add in the future, I would also love to see their heart rates during whatever exercise they do participate in. And if they don't participate in a particular exercise on a regular basis, just having a look at what their heart rate looks like when they're walking around campus all day. I'd really love to be able to compare that physical exertion with the cognitive exertion and see kind of how that matches up potentially.
Yes, me too.
Totally.
Because I feel like they're very similar from other research that I've seen. I think this was inspired from that German research study I'm sure you guys have heard about. Whereas their research, they actually were in the competitive environment, and they found that the heart rates were up to 160 to 180 beats per minute. And it's curious for me for future research as well. I would like to see, this was an idea too, in terms of getting the heart rate data in real time, so you could see kind of like what you were saying, Matt, in terms of the beginning of the game, what's the heart rate like, where does it peak in the game? Is it there's certain interactions or battles and things like that you can see where it kind of increases? I feel like the 148, maybe that was towards the end of a game or just some sort of big battle or something like that. It would be really cool to see that and be able to use that to help with training.
Right. So, I mean, with all of that being said, how well do you feel like the results that they obtained here are generalizable? Right? I mean, that's a really important question for all of us that are assessing research.
Yeah, I think you can generalize some of the data to other populations, but Obviously, there's just not enough here to really make a good case. There more research needs to be done. But I think you could see similar things in like casual gamers. So who play games like single player, first person games. Their heart rate response may be similar. It just depends on how it's played, what the story's like, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I'd say it's hard to generalize right now, and I wouldn't generalize it too much.
What do you think are some takeaways for maybe a clinician working in the space? And then we can even talk about for a gamer that's listening to this. What are the takeaways?
The takeaways are to understand specifically the demands of playing esports, and whether in non-competitive environments or competitive environments. And the main thing is that it has a huge demand on the body and mind, high heart rates, high stress level. So it's important to realize that it's similar to going out and playing soccer, where your heart rates are elevated physiologically. It's very similar. But in esports, you're not moving, you're sitting. So you don't get that positive stress. You don't get those positive benefits from actually moving. So if you're doing this for long periods of time, all of these can, negatively affect your systems, and that can lead to things like burnout, that can lead to injuries and things like that. So keeping that in mind, it's just definitely an important way that you can structure your training sessions to be more strategic, and definitely implement recovery strategies, and think about that more. I think that's definitely something you can think more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So on the clinician side or support staff side, considering how much stress and how much elevated heart rate that each of these players undergo when they're playing in a casual, and obviously potentially a lot more in a competitive environment, you have to consider recovery. You have to consider how much stress they're undergoing and train them for that. Not only through actual playing the game, but everything else that we preach at 1HP, that holistic approach, nutrition, exercise, sleep, and also incorporating the things like recovery. And the same thing goes for the casual or competitive gamer listening to this. You have to be able to build up your body to be able to tolerate all the physical and mental stressors that you're undergoing when you're playing the game. And this is just another testament to show that even though you guys might not realize it, there is a lot of cognitive stress or actual physiologic load that you guys are enduring when you're playing the game. So
yeah, I think another thing too, for coaches, for clinicians, like if there's a way down the road where players and teams can have heart rate monitors, and there's a way to like reliably track that, it's nice to know, because then you can measure that load better than right now, where it's just most subjective. Well, you actually have objective data you can like put with that, and so you can see like, okay, our players this week, they have during the heart rates have been really high, the load's been high, so we can do these recovery strategies, or next week we can take this day off, so on and so forth. I think that down the road is going to be something that can be very important,
right,
and helpful.
And I've already tried to explore doing that with a lot of the teams that I work with. But again, as I've said many times before, I think at this point in time, with the current state of performance in esports, the compliance and the willingness of both players and even organizations to want to incorporate structures that allow us to assess for this kind of thing we're not ready for it yet.
Yeah.
And there's not enough research to warrant these organizations wanting to put money towards it, or even creating the partnerships, even though I'm sure that's in development right now. So we are working towards it, both on the professional side and collegiate side, and hopefully it can get to the point where there's enough research out there that it just becomes a standard in the entire community or entire competitive community. I think that's it. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add? This was a great study, and I don't think I mentioned in the beginning, but you're actually a part of this, right, Jake?
Correct, yeah. So this was done at the University of Mississippi. I was in contact with Tom Andre, who's the professor of exercise science there, and so I kind of told him about the German study that was similar, and then he basically kind of took the idea, and then a couple of his students, Damon Cox and Silvio Valadeo, they basically ran with it, and so I kind of just helped them out with it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Kate, if you don't have anything else to add, then I think that's it.
Nope.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Look out for the next episode of Evidence-Based Esports.